John Gilroy here. AI is no longer a parlor trick. Today, we sit down with Vishwas Lele and we put AI in work boots. Hit the music, Manny.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, where industry leaders share insights on innovation with a focus on reducing cost and improving security for federal technology. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, a podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Today, we are recording this from Monk's Barbecue in lovely downtown Purcellville, Virginia. We're talking tech and maybe talking baked beans. So, Vishwas, what are we talking today? Tech or baked beans? Which topic?
Well, we are talking tech. Also talk about baked beans if you like.
Same thing. Coleslaw, pulled pork, pulled chicken, whatever we have, it's great. Vishwas Lele is very well known in the Washington, D.C. community. He is the CTO of a company called AIS, and he's also co-founder of a company called pwin.ai. Is that correct?
That is right, John.
Yeah, so brand new. I just got to practice saying it, you know. Everyone knows AIS since 1982, but this is a relatively new concept we're going to talk about today. So let's paint the picture here. AIS, big Microsoft partner, very well respected in the area here. And some people say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But you're teaching an old dog new trick with AI, aren't you?
So, John, that's been one of the very important rules within AIS, that we are focused around learning new technologies, engendered a culture of learning within the organization. So we have to reinvent ourselves every time there's a big disruption like generative AI today, and we have done that successfully over the many decades.
Well, we know you're a Microsoft partner. They're a big player in this whole artificial intelligence game. So just for the benefit of our audience, maybe you can make some definitions here. So we have OpenAI, we have Chat GPT, then we have CoPilot. Maybe you can differentiate those.
Right. So OpenAI is the company that is providing the underlying technology. Microsoft, by virtue of their investment in OpenAI, got the commercial rights to bring this technology to the enterprises, and that's how you get the Azure OpenAI portion, which is what our product is based on. So Chat GPT is just an application of generative AI. It uses the OpenAI models under the covers. And when you look at CoPilot, think of it as a chatbot, but think of it as a productivity enhancer that sits within, if you're talking about the Microsoft 365 Copilot, think of that Copilot as something that already knows your organization's data and can help you become more productive. So OpenAI, fundamental models, Azure OpenAI, an enterprise offering on top of OpenAI, and Copilot, think of this as a productivity enhancer on top of the tools that you're using today, whether it is Copilot for developers, Copilot for Office, Copilot for Dynamics.
I teased a silly opening. We are at Monk's Barbecue, by the way, and everyone's enjoying a good lunch here, I hope. And I talked about putting AI in work boots, okay? So, you know, everyone kind of knows what AI is now. It's maturing to the point where, okay, Vishwas, okay, well, what can it do for me? From a federal agency perspective, what can it do for me? Or from a company perspective, how can AI help me? And I think that's what I'm going to focus in here a little bit. So, we mentioned differentiators. One aspect of pwin.ai is helping people with proposals. Okay, we know that. Mm-hmm. Well, you're not the only game in town, are you, buddy? So how is you different from the other ones?
That's a great point, John. Great question. We have taken a slightly different approach. When I look at the tools that are out there, and there are several of them, as you pointed out, several of them are a thin veneer or a wrapper around Chat GPT, as I call them. They're Chat GPT wrappers. You take a question from an RFP or RFI, you implement a very simple RAG pattern, and most of your listeners are familiar with the RAG pattern. If not, I'll just give you a quick description. You may have data that is within the enterprise that clearly these models have not seen during the training phase. So how do you get these models to respond to questions that may be relevant to your enterprise? So what you do is you go find some information that may be helpful as a context for the language model to generate information. That's fundamentally what the RAG pattern is. So we see a number of tools that are GPT wrappers There are simpler implementation of RAG patterns. What we have tried to do, John, is take a fundamentally different approach. So for one, we have taken an approach of, I mentioned CoPilot. We think that proposal writers have a lot of information, have a lot of experience, that skills that they have honed over the years. And our tool is really about augmenting their skills. So what do I mean by that? A lot of Chat GPT equivalents, whether it is from Google or Claude or what have you, they tend to be system one type of responses. What do I mean by that? Well, Daniel Kahneman passed away recently. He was a Nobel laureate who wrote the famous book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Mm-hmm. And he talked about two modes in which your mind works. You have system one, where that's the mode that helps you avoid ditches. You come in front of a ditch, take a corrective action. You don't have to think about it, right? But system two is where you take all the information, think about it, deliberate about it, and provide a thoughtful response. All of the chatbots today are system one type of chatbots. We have tried to build a system 2 level chatbot, which takes into account all of the nuances that go into writing a winning proposal. So that's a fundamental difference. We don't force proposal writers to do all the prompt engineering themselves. They have more important things to do. And the final differentiator, John, is that we have tried to build a tool that meets them where they are. So we know that a lot of proposal writers live in SharePoint. They're familiar with that. And John, you and I have talked about SharePoint for years, if not decades. We've built a tool that essentially does not require them to have any training. So keep it simple. The underlying model can be complex, AI can be complex, but from their perspective, all they need to do is go to a SharePoint site, upload some documents, answer some questions, and that's how we generate the proposal for them.
So there's an argument to be made that writing is an art, and you're dealing with artificial intelligence. And so how can you combine those two?
Right. So as I said earlier, proposal writers, good proposal writers, proposal professionals, they have honed their skills, right? When you work with them, they talk to you about what are your differentiators. As a company, do you understand the motivation of the buyer who has issued the solicitation? They understand how do you differentiate yourself. They understand your competitors. They try to tease out this information from you, take all of this information, and then write it in your style. So what we have tried to do is we work with proposal writers, use their expertise to set up a vision for a winning proposal. We take that vision, give it to our engine, which then uses that vision to generate a response. So to answer your question, you're absolutely right. Writing is an art. AI by itself is never going to be able to do that. Well, I shouldn't say never, at least in the current stage, is not going to be able to do that. So by augmenting the vision that is provided by proposal writers, your account team, how well do you understand the customer, how good your solution architects are, how compelling your solutions are, take all of that information and then combine it with things that generative AI is good at. And that's how you get a winning proposal.
You know, there are agencies in the federal government that are kind of sensitive about different types of documents that they have and people having access to it. And so we got to ask the security question here. You know?
Of course.
When people create these different libraries, I mean, how do you assure the security for users of your product?
So John, security is paramount, no question about it. People are very concerned about when they write proposals. It's all of their secret sauce. They're worried about that. Of course, government is mandating that certain RFP documents have to be treated in a certain way. So from the very beginning of this product development, as you know, we have at AIS, we have worked in the federal space for decades. So we understand security deeply. So we offer our service in two form factors. One is we make it available as a SaaS service, but with a twist. It is a SaaS service, but every customer gets their own stamp. So the network, compute, storage, all these things are independent. No data packets from a customer's enclave is going into another customer's enclave. In fact, we have gone ahead and obtained something called the CMMC Level 2 compliance, which allows us to store RFPs that have a denomination of CUI, for example. And the way you get that standard of CMMC level 2 is you have to go through about 170 controls, John, where they test you for how do you do data security, how do you do access control. So we've gone through that. Now we realize that there'll be customers, despite having CMMC level 2 compliance, there will be some customers who will say, can I just take your application and deploy it in my environment, right? I don't want to, even though your SaaS is secure, it's isolated, I still want it in my environment. And the way we achieve that, John, is Microsoft has this concept of managed application. So we will deploy your application to your enclave, but you don't have to deal with the complexities of a custom application deployment. It will be deployed within the construct of a marketplace offering. So all the bits, all of the storage, all of the language models and algorithms are deployed to your environment.
So what about the training data itself? I mean, is this something that falls between the cracks? I mean, who owns this data? Where does it reside?
That's a great question. So first of all, we are not training on anybody's data. Your secret sauce is not going to find its way into some trained model that somebody else can use. So a couple of things, right, John? We talked about OpenAI, and this applies to any language model. There are foundational models, hundreds of billions of parameters that take millions of dollars to train. So you always start with a foundational model. We have taken an approach of using prompt engineering mainly to retrieve contextual information and then to generate content. Of course, we have a team of data scientists. We constantly look at fine-tuning. But we feel that writing an RFP response is complicated enough that you want the best and the greatest models, and you want to use prompt engineering, which means we are not training on your data. You don't run the risk of insights from your past performances leaking out to somebody else.
Next week, you will be a guest lecturer at Georgetown University. You're going to sit in a room with 6 graduate students, and they're going to have a little push and pull with you. It should be a lot of fun. At Georgetown, every class has to have an ethical component to it. It's mandatory. So if you're teaching finance, you got to have an ethical component. If you're teaching digital strategy, you got to have an ethical component to it. So what about the ethical component to pwin.ai? Where does this all fit in?
That's John, that's a great question, because there are lots of use cases today that can be enabled through generative AI. It's a disruptive technology. I feel that all of these solutions, any solutions that anybody's working on or folks are working on, think in terms of ethics. And we have tried to ground our offering in the core tenets of ethics. And let me give you a few examples. So language models, think of language models as 2 things, right? Their ability to reason and their knowledge about the world. We have tried to separate the knowledge about the world. We mainly use them as a reasoning engine, which means any content that we generate is based on your past performance, your creativity, your solutioning strategy, number one. So we are sourcing it directly. This is not a push-button approach to proposal writing that, hey, generate me something that looks eloquent, that has nothing to do with me. That's number one. Number two, we know that these language models can hallucinate, which means they can produce at times incorrect information, make up stuff, and we think that's critically important. So we take the language model generated text, tease out some important facts from that, and then test them against the ground reality. So we check for hallucinations. The other important report we do is, as a human user of this system, you should always be aware about where your data is coming from. So if I'm generating a response that is based on 100 past proposal response, then you should know exactly which document, which paragraph did that content come from. These are all core tenets of putting the human user in control of the AI. You know how it is acting. You have checks and balances. And we think that we have fundamentally aligned our product around these principles.
So if you're listening to this and you're sitting at the beach and want to learn more, I guess the obvious way to get a demo of this is go to pwin.ai and just sign up for a demo. Is that right?
That is absolutely right. We welcome you, to your listeners, to come book a demo where we will talk to you about the details, show you how this works. and that'll be awesome.
Boy, when it comes to you, AIS.com is pretty simple, and pwin.ai is pretty simple too, isn't it? Yeah. We're recording this amongst barbecue. They just opened a door behind you, and they wheeled in a bunch of cooked meat. So this is kind of an exciting place to do an interview, isn't it? I've known you for many years. Everyone knows you're real smart and you're brainiac and all that stuff. But I know you learn stuff every day. I'll bet in this little adventure you're having with proposals is that you must have learned a whole lot, haven't you? So what did you learn?
John, that has been a most exciting part of this journey. Of course, we are very passionate about helping people improve their proposals. But an important byproduct of this working on this project hands-on with an incredible team has been the learnings. So as great as these language models are, John, and I'm certain that they are disruptive and they'll change the way we do things in coming years, it is hard to build production caliber applications with these language models. For all the reasons that I talked about, they can hallucinate. Right now, the response time is too high. You don't have consistency. You can't get predictable responses in all cases. There is a scarcity. I'm sure you've heard of this. There's scarcity of GPUs, and people are trying to solve that problem through different hardware types. So if you take all of these constraints in mind, building a production application with these constraints has been an important learning just through this journey.
Tell me about the company Shipley. Where do they fit in this story?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So Shipley is considered a gold standard for proposal writing. Steve Shipley, 50 years ago, wrote the book on how to write proposals well, how to write persuasive proposals.
He talks about being customer-centric. And he does everything correctly. Talk about features, not benefits, Understand the customer needs. Put your needs behind and listen and understand. I mean, this is really great principles for proposal writing.
They're great principles, and in our journey, John, we approached Shipley and said, we would like you to partner, because any great AI solution requires good AI engineering, but it also requires great domain expertise, right? The two have to go hand in hand. It can't be that there are a bunch of engineers who decided, let me write a proposal assistance tool. I have one proposal writer in the mix, and that's sufficient. You really need a company with best practices, with process guidance, training guidance to be able to write a utility or a tool like this. And we were very fortunate when we approached Shipley. They were, John, in the midst of evaluating a number of companies. We went through an evaluation of various tools. I'm told they put a number of tools through the paces. And because of all the things that I talked about in terms of our differentiators, we are very fortunate that they picked us. And this is not a partnership where they're just referring us. It's a partnership, an exclusive partnership where they're helping us co-create, constantly improving our content, improving our guidance. So I'm very excited about this partnership with Shipley.
Yeah, I've done some research on Shipley. These are pretty impressive people. It's almost like a yin and a yang, Yeah. You need both of them. And I think you're very humble about mentioning that. I think your offering is FedRAMP High as well, isn't it? I mean, in this town, you might as well get a T-shirt and start bragging if you're FedRAMP High. I mean, it's a very difficult accomplishment.
This is a difficult thing to accomplish. And if we did not have extensive experience building production applications in those FedRAMP High IL environments, it would be very hard to achieve these levels of compliance.
So let's talk about human resources here. So we flipped the switch, and you don't need coders. I hope not, but fill in the blanks.
Right. Yes, let me answer that. Just like I talked about the proposal writers and how we augment them, we are not replacing their core skills. And I'll add a link, John, to a video I did recently about how language models are impacting the lives of developers.
I can put that in the show notes if you want.
I'll make that link available. And really the key message from that is that if you know your craft well, if you're a good developer, you understand design patterns, you know how you want to architect an application, how do you want to design it, all of those skills are going to be needed. Language models can augment your skills. So Yes, I have many, many developers on the team who are actively writing code, but at the same time, we take advantage of generative AI models to accelerate as much as we can.
I go to events all the time. I was at an event last week, a couple weeks back. I was at an event where Captain Jesse Black from the Naval Research Lab was speaking, and someone raised his hand the question and said, pardon me, sir, could you list the places where you're using artificial intelligence? He said, it would be easier for me to list the places where we haven't applied artificial intelligence. So I'm going to ask that question to you. So outside of proposal writing, okay, where do you think generative AI could solve problems for government agencies?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. I think one of the areas that I'm passionate about is the whole space around knowledge management, right? So you go to agencies, they have hundreds of thousands of documents stored in an intranet of choice or a network drive of choice. You have all of these documents, and the single biggest challenge is, how do you find information? How do you, of course, you have search, but that has not served us well. And John, you've been around in this industry long enough to know that we have paid for many knowledge management tools over the decades, and they have not served us well. So I'm very passionate about taking information that agencies have stored in different places and being able to make sense of that information. Especially, we have a lot of people retiring from these government agencies, these positions not being filled. A lot of that knowledge is walking out of the door. How can we take advantage of language models to make sense of the information that already exists, empower the people who are moving into these positions? And I think there's an important case to be made about how government can use language models in an ethical, constrained, secure manner to improve their knowledge management practices.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. We started this conversation talking about putting AI in work boots. Talked about AIS, and I think we've covered a whole lot of topics here. And what I will do, any websites that I mentioned, I'll put it in the show notes page. So if you're listening to this and you're walking your dog, go back to your house and you can maybe download it to test what it's all about, or maybe even read your article on knowledge management. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Vishwas Lele. He's the CTO for a company called AIS and founder of pwin.ai. Thanks, Vishwas.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Tech Podcast. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.